Okay, this video is going to show you how to make a traditional slab mug using a template. Now, I have cut this piece of cardstock paper to the size that I want, the height of the mug that I want, and the length. One thing you got to keep in mind is, of course, the length is going to need to be figured out to determine the base shape, which I'll show you in a moment. One thing to keep in mind is you want to keep your slab nice and clean. And if you've just rolled your slab, you want to be really, really gentle with it. Soft clay can make lots of different impressions, and the more gentle you are with it, the more likely you are to have a nice refined piece. I do always encourage using a slab stick to help cut perfect lines. So if you gently place the slab stick to the edge of your template and put gentle pressure, you could use either a pin tool or a fiddling knife to cut nice, clean slabs of clay. And you take the guesswork out of making it perfect because the slab stick's going to help you do that. So I'm going to trim this all the way around on all four sides to create the body of my slab mug. Again, being super gentle. You don't want to make too many imprints in the clay, especially while it's still soft. It's a perfect time for cutting, but not necessarily a great time for beginning to assemble quite yet. So once I get my 4 walls cut, I'm going to remove my template. Now the first thing that you're going to notice is that the clay is really susceptible to nearly any nicks and bumps and bruises, so you're going to want to be really, really gentle with it. You could take a damp sponge and really gently clean up the edges, but for the most part, you're going to let it hang out for a while. You do want this to get leather hard or slightly firmed up a little bit before you do too much with it. Otherwise, it could be trouble to work with. Now, I know that the width of my template here fits this base. So I'm going to use this cookie cutter to create what will be the bottom of the mug. And just by getting a nice clean cut and really gentle pressure to push this out, I'm going to create the base of my mug. Again, really, really gentle. Anything that you do at this point can really cause it to have little bumps and bruises along the way. So I'm just going to place this to the side and let it firm up just slightly. Now my handle, I'm going to use the width of this ruler. I like the way that this slab handle looks and feels, and so I could use any piece of my slab here to cut my handle. I'll just go over here since it's kind of out of the way, and this time I'll show you the pin tool. But you could see here that the ruler width is going to be a really good one for cutting this, what will be handle. So I'm just going to put gentle pressure with my hands, not picking it up in between, pressing and pulling, and then cleaning off any excess clay from that cut, and then doing that on the other side. Now I know that this handle is going to be plenty big, so there's no real need to worry too much about it not going to the edge. I could simply just trim it here at this point and have this nice big handle to work with. Now I'm going to remove the excess slab here, put it to the side, and we're going to talk about these elements of the mug. So we've got our slab handle, we've got our slab base, and we have the body of our mug, which of course is where the liquid goes. Now the bottom I'm just going to place to the side. You're going to want to kind of let that get set up a little bit, and the only one that you're going to really want to work with too much at this point is your handle. The nice thing about a soft handle is it's a great time to form it and let it set up slightly. So if I take my sponge and really gently on each side clean it up, front and back, and remove any canvas texture from the slab roller and clean up those sides so there's no sharp edges. You could see how gentle I'm working with it. I'm not putting a lot of pressure because I don't want the shape to change too much. Now at this point, you're going to be able to take that slab handle and begin to form its shape. Now we're going to cut this down later to the size that we like, but in order for it to hold its C shape, I'm going to place it on its side and let it set up a bit. If you're working on this for multiple days, this is a project where you may do all your cutting and shaping on one day and cover it overnight so that it could lose a bit of moisture so that the next day you're able to assemble it with much greater ease. So now we're going to take a look at the body of our mug. One thing to note about the body is, of course, we're going to flip it up and turn it into a column. But one thing that's pretty cool, and one tool that I like to point out, is this beveling tool. It's this funny wood piece that has two metal wires on each side that allow for clay to meet at a proper angle. So what you're going to want to do is hold it on one side of the clay all the way to the table, and if you pull it towards yourself, what you're going to see is that it is shaving off just the corner of the slab. So now you could see that it has a beveled edge. Now the nice thing with having a beveled edge is when you go to meet it with the other side, those two 45-degree angles are going to meet up together to create a perfect seam, which is quite nice. Now one thing I like to do when it's in this particular state is actually score that beveled edge that I can see, because it's easier to do when you have access to it right here. If you have one of these serrated rib tools, it makes the process really easy to just kind of pull down and just sort of scratch up that edge, and then you can leave it be. Now in order for those angles to meet up properly, the bevel needs to be on the other side so that those 45-degree angles can meet up together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over really gently. You saw how I almost kind of like dropped it on the table because I don't want to put too much pressure. Anytime you're moving slabs, you don't want to squeeze at all. Now I have access to that bottom side where I could take that sponge again and really kind of stamp out any of that canvas texture from the slab roller and gently clean it up again, because this is going to be the inside of my mug and you have the best access to all of those edges right now, which is kind of nice. So now that I've got this cleaned up, I can place my wire beveler on the side and do the same thing, where now I have cut a 45-degree angle off of the other side, and I could do the same thing. I could score it up because this is where the seam is going to be. This is where the mug is going to come together once it sets up. So this clay is pretty soft. Again, if you have the luxury of time, you might decide to let it sit overnight, lose a little moisture, or if you cut these fairly quickly at the beginning of class, let it sit for a while and kind of wait a minute, because these slabs are going to be much easier to work with when they're not super gooey. Because we're on camera now, I'm going to kind of rush the process along, but you could ultimately kind of see what is going to happen. So I'm very gently going to be placing my slab into a barrel shape or a column shape, and really quickly you're going to be able to see that those beveled edges are going to be able to line up quite nicely and create a nice column shape for a mug. So you could see the benefit of working with nice soft clay is this clay had no problem turning into a mug shape, into a column shape. If this clay was too dry, it would have a much harder time and it would start to crack. So this is where you just need to remind yourself of those stages of clay and remember what happens in each of those stages. So again, going back to our timeline, if this is how far I got in a class, leaving this covered overnight in your locker is going to be a great place to leave it to ultimately assemble it the following day. One extra step that you could make is actually slip and scoring that edge together. We've already done the scoring process, and now by adding some slip, we would be able to get that edge together. So if I add a little bit of slip to this edge, and got it all on there, then I would be able to very gently line up. I kind of like to look at it from across the edge, because I can match up that bottom edge with itself. And I almost kind of like to turn it into sort of this oblong shape. It actually helps get this edge together a little bit more. Kind of do it this way so you can kind of see how I can get that edge together and start to encourage that clay to zipper up. So now, one way that we can encourage this seam to start to come together is actually with a needle tool, a fork, or this serrated rib tool, which I really like to use to help encourage that clay to run together. And the way that you're going to do that is by scratching it together. Now at first most students go, Misty, you're making it look super ugly. What are you thinking? But the reality is clay, if you don't encourage it to join together, isn't going to want to like Velcro. So I'm trying to do it on the side here. You will actually pull this clay just gently along that seam, left to right. So you're encouraging that clay to run together. Now you're putting just gentle pressure. You're ultimately going to clean this all up. But for now, I leave it for a little bit to set up. Now that inside edge, you're gonna see, looks a little messy. And I like to take the wooden modeling tool here, and along that inside edge, using my outer hand as leverage, pulling the modeling tool just gently up the wall and kind of stamping out a little bit that line on the inside. If you have any strong divots in there, you could always add some soft clay, but you want to be pretty gentle with this, otherwise it'll be super noticeable and obvious. But I'm taking that modeling tool all the way up that edge so that where that seam meets, see if I can get you a better angle, we're kind of stamping out that seam. Okay, so now if this is how far you get on day one, this is a great place to be. Even if it is setting up in this kind of awkward oval shape, what this is allowing the clay to do is marry together and start to become one. Ultimately, we want this to be one piece that doesn't want to pull apart. And that is all about letting it firm up slowly and allowing those stages of clay to happen gradually. Okay, so you could see that on day 2 of my mug project, I have my mug, my handle, and my base on my board that was let to set up overnight to get leather hard. So most of my components are here and they're still fairly soft, but they're gonna hold their shape a little bit more because they have been sitting out. I've got my mug that I kind of left in this sort of oblong shape to kind of start to set up. And I could use at this point, if I wanted, my rib tool to clean up that edge that I had kind of scratched it together, so you could see how you could make it look much nicer with just using that rib tool. Pretty easy going there. So now our goal for this next portion is to attach the base and handle. The base, of course, has been setting up and is here, and I have 2 of them cut for the mug, so I could choose which one I like. And this base is the perfect size that I will be able to attach my mug to give it a bottom, of course. Now, the important thing to remember, of course, is that we need to use that slip and scoring technique to make sure that it attaches. Okay, so I'm taking a moment to clean up the base, making sure it's nice and smooth and ready to go. The serrated rib tool is going to be a good one if you have it. Otherwise, you could use a needle tool or a fiddling knife or a fork or anything that around the edge where the mug is going to meet up with it, you are scratching the surface. Now, you want to make sure you just scratch that outside edge because you don't want too many imperfections in the middle where you're going to be able to see. You want to try to keep this all on that outside edge. So you can see I have it all scratched up on the outside. Now at this point I like to determine which side just looks better. You can kind of get an idea for which end just has a better viewpoint. And I think that I like this one better. So I'm going to go with the opposite end as scratching it up. So I'm going to use that serrated rib tool and again kind of just scratch that whole bottom up. I kind of go in multiple directions to really give it a good scratch up so that I know there's going to be a good connection. Now, because this was setting up overnight in this kind of awkward position, I'm going to kind of help it along a little bit, and anywhere where it starts to pull apart again, I could use that rib tool. We're going to be able to smooth all this out later, so you're kind of just gently working with it to really try to force it into that circular shape. We're going to be able to use the base that we know is a perfect circle, because we've cut a perfect circle, to help us line it out to make sure that the mug is nice and even. So at this point, we're going to want to add our slip. So you can use your finger, you could use a paintbrush, get nice, good application of slip all the way around that edge, because this is really going to help combine the wall of your mug to the base of your mug. So now I've got a good amount of slip on there. And now is when I'm going to place the mug on the base. Now, the really cool thing is if you know you've cut a perfect circle, you can use that to your advantage by pulling and pushing the walls of the mug to essentially line up with that outside circular shape. Since the base is a perfect circle, and we know that these walls aren't, we're going to be able to kind of, from the middle and from the outside, push and pull until the whole base lines up with that outer edge. And you keep going around and pushing and pulling and kind of finding a place where the body meets up with that base in a nice, uniform fashion. At the point in which you feel good about where the base lines up, all the way around, you kind of let it hang out there for a moment. I kind of put a little bit of pressure. You really want to kind of solidify that onto the bottom. Now the next part is pretty easy, but it's super essential, and that is wanting to take a wet paintbrush. I like this kind of thicker one, and all the way around where those walls meet the base on the inside, you're going to want to go around in that edge all the way in there to really clean up where the wall meets that bottom base. And the bristles of the brush plus a little bit of water do a good job of cleaning up those walls down at the bottom so that you have a nice clean connection all the way around, all the way around. And again, don't hold back on this. Go around and around and around. You can really kind of clean up some of those connections, even that seam where it lines back up. That brush can be a really helpful tool in cleaning it up. And one other reminder, just make sure that you're working with your slabs really gently. This clay is still fairly soft, and even the tiniest of impressions can make a pretty drastic imprint. So you just want to be just really gentle with slabs and not kind of go over the top with anything. So once you got that inside edge all cleaned up, now we want to tackle the outside edge. So the outside edge is kind of a funny technique because you make it look uglier before you make it look better. And students are always surprised by this. They say, Miss D, why are you making it look ugly? And then all of a sudden they go, oh, okay, it looks way better. So this serrated rib tool is such a helpful one for this, but you could use a fork or even a needle tool, any sharp object to start to pull the clay from the bottom slab into the wall. You kind of want to interlock them. That's the best way to think of it. And by taking that serrated rib tool and going all the way around and scratching the bottom clay into the side clay, you are in essence interlocking that clay and also making it so you won't be able to see the seam from where the body meets the base. So I like to give it a really nice go around to make sure it's all interlocked. And you can see there I've got my seam where they meet and I've got the seam where the base meets the body. And again, it obviously looks a little bit ugly, but here's the magic. By taking the flat side of the rib tool or a different tool so that someone else could borrow the serrated one, you very easily can pull that metal rib up the wall and all the way around the bottom. You put gentle pressure and pull up, and you can see there that we're scraping that wall together, smoothing it out, and ultimately combining those two walls of clay. So this is working with individual slabs of clay and combining them together. And so you can see once I go around the whole wall, now I have a nice clean bottom. Now of course I could use that sponge tool, get it a little wet, not too wet, and really smooth out that bottom so that you could see where the wall meets the base. And now it's totally connected. Of course, you could spend a little bit of extra time where you know that that seam is from where the wall clay met itself. And then additionally, you could spend some time in and around the opening to make sure it's nice and clean, nice and round, nice and even, and nice and refined. Gentle, 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 all the way around. Everything you want to do with slab is slow, it's intentional, and it's cautious. So you could see here that I now have the wall of my mug meeting the base of my mug and meeting itself at its seam. The inside looks super clean, and we'll continue to get a chance to refine it a little bit as it continues to set up to be able to attach the handle. Okay, now we're going to look at attaching our handle, and I've had my handle kind of setting up to get slightly firm. It's been setting up on its side, and I had wrapped it overnight. I had made two different ones. This one got actually a little too firm, so I'm going to use this one here. It's a little softer. And obviously at this shape, it's way too big, and we're going to need to trim it down a little bit. One thing I like to do is I like to kind of put my mug sort of over the top of it and then determine where I think I want my cut to be. So I'll give myself like little notes. And I actually like to use a cookie cutter. The reason why I like to use a cookie cutter to shape out is because it gives it a little bit of like a rainbow arc, a little bit, which can help with shaping it to a cylindrical shape. So remember that you could always cut more. It's better to start off small, and then you could always cut more as needed. I think I'm liking that size for this nice big mug here, and so you can kind of put it up next to it and determine if that's a good size for you. Of course, if you want it smaller, you can cut it a little smaller, but you can kind of see how that cookie cutter gives it a little bit more of a U-like shape, so that when you go to slip it and score it, it actually matches up pretty well. So first things first, you're going to want to figure out where you are going to attach your handle. And I like to actually find the place that the slab has come together. I can kind of tell it was right here based on just looking on the inside. So where it's come together, I like to put the handle because it kind of tricks the eye a little bit, and you can't really tell that that's where it came together. So if you're able to tell, you could do it there. If you want it somewhere different, it's totally up to you. The important thing is that it is in the center and it is level top to bottom. So one thing that you could do is look at it from a bird's eye view and figure out where that center point is. Give yourself a little guide. Where is it in the center and where is it straight down? Because you're going to want to line up the top of the handle with the bottom of the handle directly in the center of the mug, which is going to make it so that it's nice and symmetrical. So at the time that I feel like I know where I want to put it, and again, I'm kind of just looking at it on the top, making sure it's nice and even from all angles, I'm going to place it on my mug and give myself some guides so I know where it hits. So I'm drawing a little line top and bottom of where my slab mug hits so that I know where I need to scratch. So now you could use a scoring tool, you can use a needle tool, you can use a serrated rib tool, anything to give nice deep score lines for where that handle is going to attach. All right, and then similarly on the handle itself, you're going to want to scratch up where the handle is going to hit, which of course is just on these outside edges here. So you can scratch those up there. You're going to want to add a bit of slip to each of those sides. Now you can add it to the mug or to the handle. It doesn't really matter because they're all going to combine themselves anyways. And then you are going to line it up. You are going to stick it on and push from the inside and the outside to get a nice, strong connection for where that lines up. See that there? All right, I'll usually let that kind of set up a little bit. And then what I like to do is actually take a damp, not super wet, but damp paintbrush and actually use that extra slip that's kind of peeking out all those edges and pull it all the way around. Now, you could decide if you want your handle to have any additional elements to it, if you want to add a coil all the way around, if you like the way it looks to have your handle go from smaller to bigger, you could actually place a small coil all the way around that connector on the top and the bottom and blend it in, and that's going to give you more of a gradual increase in size. Or you can simply use the extra slip and a wet paintbrush like I'm showing here and really kind of connecting it that way. The very important thing with anything with slab, but especially a slab mug, is that drying should happen very slowly. If this tries to dry too quickly, this connector is going to be compromised and you might see it actually crack, which can be kind of a bummer after all of this hard work. So I'm getting it all cleaned up and I am going to let it set up. Sometimes if I know that the handle is slightly soft, which this one has a little bit of softness to it, I might even put a dry sponge right underneath that handle, or a ball of clay. You could even make a little ball of clay and place it underneath it, and that's simply going to give it a little bit of support as this handle is setting up a little bit and continuing to dry. From here on out, it's all about letting your mug dry slowly and giving yourself time to do something fun with it. Whether you're going to carve into it, add a fun texture, put a word on it, maybe change its shape a little bit, maybe do something fun with the handle. You could be creative, but at this point, your slab mug is now together, and you get to be the artist here and really clean it up. A wet paintbrush up the walls, around the edges, a damp sponge in and around those edges, all up and down these walls. Once the handle sets up, in and around the handle is really going to create a nice, clean mug for you to enjoy.